I think that service is maybe the kind of least talked about part of yoga. That's the most important. I mean, to me, if you think about it, like all of yoga is really about service. The whole practice. Well, look at the Bhagavad Gita, for example. The whole text, the whole teaching is about being of service, which means that you act from a place of love without expecting something back. Literally, just in loving that we act, and it's such a beautiful way to live in the world. And I think all the yoga practices we do are created to support us in being able to be there, to be in loving service to everyone we meet, and our family and our friends and our students too. And so to me, yoga teaching is an opportunity. It's a practice, it's an opportunity to be of service and to you know, to make mistakes and to have challenges and to kind of explore myself in a sense in relationship to my students. So it becomes like a practice for me to see where I'm not being of service, where I may be focused on my personal needs. And I think teaching is an opportunity to really do that. How can I be here present with people in a loving way, caring for them without just focusing on, do they think I'm doing a good job? Do they like me? Am I getting paid enough? Like all the things I need, which is totally human of us to do. But I mean, that's the point of yoga, is to transcend that and to be in a more loving space as much as we can.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to MYYT, where you are learning to level up your yoga teaching one masterful class at a time. I promise to always be transparent and honest with you here and now. It feels so strange to be recording this unique intro for this episode, albeit I'm so excited for today's guest. The conversation is so powerful. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. Personally, as far as a life update, I've actually received two pieces of bad news. The first is that a dear friend passed away a couple days ago, and we just heard about it this morning. This friend was also an employer. They employed me to be in a tribute show. It's called Yesterday Once More. I'm actually going on tour with the show in June of this year, 2024. And they were the choreographer for this show. And last year, they had suffered 2 seizures. Anyway, it's just kind of happened all very suddenly that this person has passed on. And it is so jarring when you find out that somebody that you know is no longer here. And it's such a bizarre feeling. So I'm kind of trying to just honestly wrap my brain around that, just to be real, just a real person behind this microphone, and saying that I'm really struggling with it. I'm really struggling with this. And to extend into that feeling of death and the weirdness of things ending, I'm also going through a big transition professionally. I can't disclose any of the details just yet. Basically been given an ultimatum to say, do what you want to do and what you've been working so hard to do for you and your business, or continue to work for somebody else's business at the expense of continuing to expand and grow yourself. So I know that's very cryptic, very vague and weird, and I apologize, but I always want to be honest with you. So that's me in my life updates. So with all that being said, I wanted to read the true story submission this week. It actually comes from Jody, and this is a really sweet story. Jody Vogel wrote, I had been teaching a gentle yoga class at a studio for several years. This class was slower moving and had yin-like postures for the last half of the class, which meant that I had more time to talk about yoga philosophy, tell stories, and share inspiration. I had a student who regularly attended, and I would visit with her as time permitted. Over the next 2 years, I started to know a little bit about her. Like, she had moved here from another state, was married with 2 teen boys, etc. Typical teacher-student relationship that never really extended outside the studio. One day, she stayed after class and approached me. She told me that her dear friend and neighbor had just lost her battle with cancer, and that she had been asked to fly to Chicago for the funeral and deliver a eulogy. She said that she had written out what she planned to say, but needed to share it with someone, and I was the first person that she thought of because she always felt so safe in class, and that I was wise, peaceful, and compassionate. I was so stunned. We sat down on the floor of the studio and she read me the beautiful tribute to her friend and we cried together. It was a reminder to me that as teachers, we don't always know the ways in which we touch people, that there's a sacred bond that can't be created in yoga class that goes way beyond the postures. As teachers, we are there to create safe spaces for people to feel, process, grow, release, and connect. Often we don't get to see the fruits of our labor and we just need to trust that it makes a difference to someone. I was so honored and humbled to be trusted in this way. Thank you, Jody, so much for submitting your true story. It seems appropriate and perfectly in tune with the feeling of today. And it's true, we never really know the impact that we have on our students. And it feels so validating in one way to have somebody trust you enough to do something that raw and that vulnerable. And so just thank you for sharing. I love to hear your stories. And that's why we have the true story submission here on the podcast, is to hear what it's like being a yoga teacher from all you yoga teacher listeners out there. And it's really simple to submit your true story. All you have to do is head to the show notes and click on the link that says submit your true story. The form takes like 2 or 3 minutes to fill out. And I would love to feature your story on the podcast here. The conversation with Jivana today is so heartwarming. He has a way of simultaneously making you feel relieved in the role of a teacher, and at the same time making you feel responsible being in the role of a teacher. So he makes you feel good, but he also is like, show up and make sure you're doing the job well, because it comes with heavy meaning, comes with lots of weight. It's just like the word guru translated is being a yoga teacher demands responsibility. So he gives us tons of actionable advice on how to skillfully open the doors to practitioners, all practitioners, no matter their size, no matter their age, no matter their orientation, their race, their ability. He's all about making yoga accessible, inclusive, and encouraging diversity. In this episode, we talk about things like the singular shift in your persona that immediately makes your teaching more accessible. Teaching yoga as a practice and from service. How to remind your students of their own agency, power, and control. Why you, as the teacher, need to set boundaries for your own protection and sustainability. What collaboration can do for your creativity, inspiration, and even conflict resolution. The dangers of words like mastery. When seemingly opposing feelings exist, and how to navigate the dialectic nature of taking the seat of the teacher, the roles and responsibilities of teachers and students explained. Practical teaching tips like prepare separately, practice together to help you guide diverse abilities in one class. And finally, he ends with words of wisdom that he would say to himself 30 years ago at the beginning of his teaching career. He is a vast of wealth and wisdom, and I know you're going to get so much out of this episode. My favorite part is he ends the episode just with an encouraging word to all yoga teachers. And I personally needed to hear that today, knowing that what we do matters. And like Jody's true story submission, that the work we do is important in making people feel seen and process their emotions, especially when they're heavy. So whatever it is that you're going through today, and I know that you're probably going through something because life is always lifing, I'm sending you some love. Jivana is sending you some love and encouragement. Just keep sharing and spreading.
Hey
the gift of
yogis,
yoga, and you'll be
Mackenzie
okay.
Fly here.
Let's dive into
Mom,
this episode.
yogapreneur, teacher trainer, retreat leader, and your guide to master your yoga teaching. This podcast is your weekly dose of actionable wisdom and candid chats with industry experts. Learn to connect deeper, weave yogic magic, and lead by example. Full disclosure, I'm still mastering it too, but together we'll skyrocket your impact and income. Hit subscribe and let's grow, one episode at a time.
Jivana Hayman is the founder and director of Accessible Yoga, an organization dedicated to increasing access to the yoga teachings and supporting yoga teachers. He's the author of the books Accessible Yoga, Poses and Practices for Everybody, Yoga Revolution, Building a Practice of Courage and Compassion, and a new book, The Teacher's Guide to Accessible Yoga, Best Practices for Sharing Yoga with Everybody. His books, classes, and trainings offer support to yoga teachers and yoga therapists in finding ways to bring creativity and collaboration into their teaching while still respecting the ancient yoga tradition. Thank you so much, Jivana, for being here. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Mackenzie. I'm excited.
You were very generous and sent me your newest book a couple of weeks ago, and I've read pieces of it about 3 times, but definitely the whole thing once through. At this point, with getting the Audible as well, I'm close to listening to it twice through. So I really, really, really have enjoyed what you've written and think it is so special and such a gift to the world, but especially to yoga teachers. So I wanted to start just by saying thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for reading it, especially more than once. That means a lot to me. It's funny writing a book. Like, I don't know. It's just it feels like a one-way conversation, and so it's really nice to hear.
Well, I know it's a big question to start with, but in the book, you talk about so many ways to make yoga accessible, from kind of the bigger topics of inclusivity and diversity to like subtleties of language. So, can you share some of the ones with everybody listening that you mention in the book of ways that we can start making yoga accessible and what accessible yoga means?
Hmm. Yeah, it is a big question because it is like the whole book. But I would say, I think what comes to mind is more, I think, an attitude first, like a perception of our students and their wholeness. I think that's maybe the biggest thing is sometimes I think as yoga teachers, we're trained to kind of see the problems and see the challenges that people have. And often they're bringing them to us like, oh, my back hurts, so I have this problem and I'm stressed. But in a way, like, I think the thing with accessible yoga to me is to see people as full and complete already, to recognize their inherent wholeness or spirit. And it's a spiritual practice for me actually to do that, to like see that in people and simultaneously recognize their challenges and the lived experience they're having. But I think to start out in kind of a positive way is really important. And I think that shifts the dynamic in the classroom. So a lot of what I share in the book is like that, about how we can approach the students in relationship. And I think in any relationship, it doesn't go well if you think that like you're fine and you have all the answers and they're kind of messed up and need you. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's like, just think of it like any relationship. How can I create a beautiful connection with this person? What do you think?
I love that so much. And one of my key teachers, he always did describe yoga about being in relationship and being in relationship in a way that quote unquote comes out successful, in a way that supports each other individually, but how those two pillars, when coming together by choice and by consent and by collaboration, which you talk a lot about, that they then can support and hold this whole other beautiful thing that they couldn't do alone. So yeah, you speak so much about that. I think the beautiful thing that you twist is the idea of yoga teaching as an act of service. Will you tell everybody what you wrote about in terms of taking on the identity of a yoga teacher, but being from the purpose and point of being in service?
That's such a good question because I think that service is maybe the kind of least talked about part of yoga. That's the most important. I mean, to me, if you think about it, like all of yoga is really about service. The whole practice. Look at the Bhagavad Gita, for example. The whole text, the whole teaching is about being of service, which means that you act from a place of love without expecting something back. Literally, just in loving that we act, and it's such a beautiful way to live in the world. And I think all the yoga practices we do are created to support us in being able to be there, to be in loving service to everyone we meet, and our family and our friends. And and our students too. And so to me, yoga teaching is an opportunity. It's a practice, it's an opportunity to be of service and to to make mistakes and to have challenges and to kind of explore myself in a sense in relationship to my students. So it becomes like a practice for me to see where I'm not being of service, where I may be focused on my personal needs. And I think teaching is an opportunity to really do that. How can I be here present with people in a loving way, caring for them without just focusing on, do they think I'm doing a good job? Do they like me? Am I getting paid enough? Like all the things I need, which is totally human of us to do. But I mean, that's the point of yoga, is to like transcend that and to be in a more loving space as much as we can.
It reminds me of a parable, and I think there's many variations and versions of this parable, but it goes something like two monks or two men are swimming across a river, and somehow they see a scorpion on a leaf. You're shaking your head, so maybe you already know this one, but one of the monks like goes to grab the scorpion, and the scorpion, of course, stings him. And you would think that a sensible person would stop trying to reach out and help something that's going to inevitably harm them. But the monk keeps trying. And the other monk that's with him says something like, "Why do you keep doing this? You're only going to get hurt." And the other monk says, "Well, the scorpion's dharma is to sting. Humans or people's dharma is to serve." And that it just what you were saying kind of reminds me of that parable and kind of that lesson that above all things, when you take back into the seat of the teacher with that intention of just serving, that it can be really profound and powerful. Have you heard that story?
Yeah, and it always confused me a little. I get it. I love it. But I think because I think it does speak a truth about that. Like that's our nature. But I always listen to that story and think, but I don't want to keep getting stung. Like I want to learn from my mistakes personally. Like so I hope that's not the message I'm sharing exactly. Like I want to say be of service, but also protect yourself. Yeah, and I talk about that in the book a bit about boundaries. And I feel like boundaries is like the other part of the equation. It's like be of service, be loving and caring to your students. But the only way to do that and to be sustain and to stay in that for a long time is to have really, really clear boundaries with them, which is to be able to say no, to say like, I can't have coffee with you after class. Like that's a boundary for me. Like I don't hang out with my students, something like that. Like you decide what it is for you. But like for me over time, I would get so involved with my students. Like I love them, and some of them I had for years and years and years, and I would just like get way involved in their lives. But sometimes something would happen, and it would just be devastating, or they would get upset with me, for something. And I think when I say have a relationship with your student, I think it's like have the relationship of teacher and student actually, and do it well. You don't have to be their best friend. You don't have to be their therapist. Like watch out, be conscious of your scope of practice. Like what are you actually professionally trained to do? And then have really clear boundaries around that, or even policies. You can think of it like policies, like I said, like, oh, I don't really hang out with my students outside of class, or or I have this policy, like a refund policy, or whatever it is. Like clear rules and structure for yourself, I think can help a lot, because then it's not personal. It's not that I don't like you. It's that this is my personal kind of rule that helps me be of service and have more energy to give ongoing. Like I have a friend here in town who she is so incredible and she loves her students so much. But I think to me, it's like she goes too far. She'll drive them to class. She'll like literally go pick people up, bring them to class, drive them home, take them out for meals. And, often these are students that really need that. But it's like, where does it end? Like, I don't, for me, it's like, I wouldn't have the energy to teach if I was so involved in their lives. So it's like, where do you find that balance?
It's a good point, and that's where the beauty comes from our uniqueness, and maybe to that friend, it's not too much of an ask for her, and that it brings her more energy, whereas for you, it feels very depleting. But is this kind of is where you're going into the ABCs of accessible yoga? Can you unpack some of that? You already did a little bit with boundaries, but the A and the C, especially the C for me, is like
Yeah, the ABCs are agency, boundaries, and collaboration. I think there's a bunch of different ways to approach those three concepts, but I'll just say agency is basically recognizing people's inherent power and control that they have over themselves and their lives. And a lot of us don't recognize that, especially people, disabled people or people with a marginalized background. Like for me as a queer person, I think it takes a little more work for me to have agency. Like I think sometimes I've had to find ways in my life to like just kind of be in my power and recognize my inherent power that I have. Part of that process of agency is helping people just recognize it in themselves. And that's what yoga does. I mean, yoga connects us to that place, right? Like that we already have inside of us. That's what is so amazing about the yoga teachings and the yoga practice is that, yoga begins with this positive affirmation of our being a spiritual being, that we are full and whole, kind of as I started saying earlier. And the practices all kind of remind us and bring us back to that. So that's what agency is in many ways, to help students recognize their inherent power and control that they have. And so when we're teaching, I think doing it in a way where you're giving students control. So it's not like I'm instructing you, like, here, try doing this pose this way. But then as a student, you get to decide, how does that feel in my body? Maybe I don't want to do it. It's a relationship and it's a back and forth. So it's not simply like, it's not Simon Says, right? Like I say that. It's not like, follow me, it's like, listen to me or not if it doesn't feel right. And then boundaries is that same thing where boundaries you could think of from my side, like I was saying, as a teacher, where do I draw the line? Like, how do I protect myself so I have energy to serve? But also on the student side, it could be boundaries could be the rules that you have in place for the class, or even how you address issues between students. Because I have to say, I've taught 30 years next year, that most of the challenges that come up in class are often between students, like not often, but just occasionally, like, that's my spot, or, I want the window open, I want it closed, or, whatever it is. There's just some like, right. So that's, boundaries are helping students to like recognize that they have freedom, they have agency, but within the context of this class, you have to kind of have certain behavior. Like, okay, we're going to do meditation now. You don't have to sit still, but you also can't run around and disturb the other people. Like, that's a boundary. And the way that all gets resolved is collaboration. Like, whether it's collaboration between me and the student, helping them find a form of a practice that works for them, or between students, helping them resolve whatever conflict. Collaboration is where we come together and work together to solve whatever challenge has arisen. Is that what you were thinking of?
That's exactly what I'm thinking of. And I think that I really love that you did in the book was bringing up a scenario and describing a lot of times like scenarios that have happened in your real like experience of teaching. And then you would give these kind of thoughtful reflections on kind of how to handle situations like that. And in particular, the moment that you're talking about is like another student kind of taking the seat of teacher or trying to guide like a neighbor through something and acting like a teacher. And you were talking about different ways that you could handle that in real time. And then maybe even going as far as pulling them aside after class and saying something like, I would really appreciate it if you would let me be the teacher. And then maybe also invite them to then look into being a yoga teacher if they feel like that's their love language or that's their passion. And I thought that was really, really genius.
Yeah, I've had all of those scenarios are real, like have happened to me. I didn't always respond as well as I did in the book. No, that's like, what is it? Hindsight is 2020. Like I basically, can look back now and reflect on, oh wow, these are the things I could have done. I mean, sometimes I responded okay. I think with that scenario, that guy, I did have to go and talk to him, and I did encourage him to become a yoga teacher. But I mean, I don't know. With the other scenarios, I definitely did not respond always like perfectly. It's just, you do the best you can in the moment. But that's the thing about teaching yoga. It's like, I think it's just surprising. I don't know what you've found over your experience, but it's surprising how much comes up for people in the context of a yoga class. And I think yoga teachers, we're often trained just in terms of like teaching the practice. Like that's all we know. That's all we're trained to do in our, teacher training programs. But there's so much like interpersonal stuff that goes on. And I just don't think we get a lot of support in that way. I mean, here, like your podcast, you're offering that. I think just having this conversation is that kind of a support system. But I think it's lacking in the yoga world. Part of where I find it most helpful, or like where I find the most support, is from other yoga teachers, just having yoga teacher friends, peer mentoring, like peers who I can talk to about, oh my God, this is what happened. I mean, I text my yoga teacher friends every day. Can you believe this happened today? Or, oh my God, it's like, or it was really great, or whatever. Yeah. So you do that too?
I definitely do that. That was my hope and aim when creating this podcast, is that it's just a place that we can all come together and talk about, number one, how heavy the responsibility is of trying to be a yoga teacher. I heard you say on Maddo's yoga teacher resource podcast, you were like, the word mastery annoys me. This was like 2 days after you had said yes to be on this podcast. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's so funny that he feels that way, but yet he said yes. And I actually would really appreciate if you would share why that word annoys you. What did you say there? And would you mind saying it here?
Yeah, no, I remember. I mean, actually, I think the way you phrase your title of your podcast is master as a verb. Is that correct? I think that's a little different than what I'm talking about. I mean, I wouldn't have chosen your title, honestly, but I can tell you why. But it doesn't bother me as much because you're talking about as an active process of learning and getting better at something, and that's fine. What bothers me is when someone offers a master class. I think that the idea that I mean, I've been teaching, like I said, a really long time, and I just know that I'm still not perfect. Like I have so much to learn. And I think yoga is such a vast subject. And to me, when I lose humility, I'm not doing my practice. Like, you know, not only is it vast, but the teachings themselves are about recognizing that we are limited, that the mind itself isn't all we are. And so I don't know, to me, I think the idea of like a master class, I think that's what I was trying to get at. I'm not sure if I remember it correctly, but I think that feels like putting yourself up on a pedestal. Like it's just like, I'm the master of this. And by the way, also, I think that term master has a connection to slavery in the US, to be honest. And so that's the other reason I don't particularly like the word of someone calling themselves a master at something or a master class. Um, yeah, does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And why I wanted to bring it up is because I also don't want any listeners to be confused in thinking that it's something you can attain, because like humility, the second that you proclaim that you are it, you no longer are it.
Like if I'm, oh, here's a masterclass in teaching yoga, and you know what? That's scary. It's like I know I'm going to mess up if I do that. Like I'm putting myself in a dangerous position when I do that. Even writing a book, like honestly, I'm writing a book, putting it out in the world is scary. Saying here's a book on teaching yoga, here's a book on making it accessible. It's like I'm just like putting myself in a dangerous situation, to be criticized. But that's my practice. Like that's my learning. I'm okay with people criticizing me. I'm okay with continuing to learn. I know that it's not perfect. We were talking about that earlier too, around kind of like making mistakes and like, being perfect with stuff. And I just had to accept that I'm human and I'm going to mess up and I'm going to learn from that. And that's my practice. And that's why, honestly, like a big theme in this book was about that, like teaching as a practice. I'm a very different teacher than I was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And that's okay. And I would say for yoga teachers, especially those that are newer, it's something I think I say in the book, actually. It's like, it's okay to be new at something. It's okay to be bad at something, actually. And like, why not embrace that? Like, embrace the newness, because how else can you learn? How can you become an experienced teacher if you're not a new teacher, right? If you don't allow yourself that.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And you talk a lot about imposter syndrome too. And there's so many hindrances and obstacles and doubts and insecurities in the beginning, that the only way that you're going to get that thing that you desire to be, that you aspire to be, is by having a willingness to pass through it. That the only way you're going to get it is through doing it.
I still go through it. It's not, it doesn't go away for me. Like, I still have imposter syndrome. It's not, it's, and I think what I try to share in the book too about it is like, I think part of imposter syndrome is okay. Like, part of it is recognizing that like I said earlier, we don't know everything. Yoga is vast, honestly. Like, I don't know anyone who can comprehend all of yoga. It's not possible. it is such a huge topic that has so many different pieces that are often contradictory and don't even, like, it's not one thing. There's not one yoga. I can't, whenever I'm training yoga teachers, my favorite thing to do is to just have them define what is yoga. And like,
Right.
we could talk about it for hours because it's like there isn't one definition. It really depends on, well, which source are you talking about? You can have a definition of yoga according to Patanjali or from the Gita or from your teacher, but it's not like there's one way. So I think yoga is special in that way, because it's a vast topic. It's also a spiritual practice, and I think the reason I'm saying all this, there's another purpose here. I guess I should just be honest, which is I think these teachings are so powerful that if we don't approach them with humility, we put ourselves in the position of potentially causing harm. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's been so much abuse in yoga, and like, it's not a coincidence, because we're talking about a group of practices that hold so much power and so much potential for transformation, and we have to handle them with the respect that they deserve, which is to recognize that they're beyond us. Like, it's just beyond me. Whatever I'm sharing, it's not from me. It's like what I learned, and the transformation people experience, I'm not necessarily creating that, right? Like, I'm supporting their process.
It's a dichotomy feeling for me of being split between, on one side, letting that set me free and quote unquote like lift up weight and pressure off my shoulders. But then at the same time, it makes me want to like approach yoga and the truth with knees knocking, because I'm like, there's no way little me could do it justice, and I think that's another aim in having all these conversations for me personally, is just learning from other people, because I know that myself, my small limited vantage point, couldn't possibly see all of the different directions that we could come from to get to the same place. So I just really value these conversations. Yeah, I guess that's just how I feel, is like at once, and then at the other side, like, ah.
Yeah, you said it so beautifully. Like, you just summarized what I was trying to share. I mean, it was exactly right. It's a paradox or something, or like you said, a dichotomy, or what's the other? There's another word I like to think of. Dialectic. I don't know if you know that dialectic, because a dialectic is two seemingly opposed truths. So two things that are true that seem like they can't be. And I think that's what it is. That, like, I think what it is, the dialectic for me is like, yoga is so incredible and transformational, and I feel it, and I can, I just love teaching so much and sharing these teachings and practices, and it's my dharma, my purpose in life. At the same time, I feel totally insecure about it, and I know that I can't do it justice. So it's like I'm doing it, and also at the same time, part of me is recognizing that I really don't know what I'm doing. Or you can think of it, it's almost like in a Buddhist way, like doing and not doing at the same time, maybe is better. It's like I'm doing it, but it's not really me doing it. So the teachings are just there coming through us. They're ancient teachings, thousands and thousands of years old.
So good. So good. I want to kind of back up to, because I guess at one point when I'm reading, I'm like, I hear what you're saying and I believe them and I know them as true. But then this kind of is what we're talking about, of like, there's this friction at the same time of like how to do both at the same time. I guess what I'm referring to is having clear boundaries. But at the same time, acknowledging the power difference between the relationship of student and teacher, and how do you have those boundaries and set like the clear roles, but then at the same time be on the same level so that you can collaborate. When does it turn on and when does it turn off, so that you can be in relationship in a way that is sustainable?
Such a good question. What it is like, it's not that we have the same roles as each other. We have different roles. Like, I have the role of teacher, and then someone will have the role of student in that scenario. But what's equal is that we're both human, and we both are equally deserving of respect and kindness, and you know what I mean? Like, that we're equal in our humanity and in our spirit too, that we're both really the same, and yet we're playing different roles. And so while we're there playing roles, we are clear about that. my role here is teacher. And so boundaries that I have will be around what does it mean to be teacher? For me, that a boundary, an example is like that if you're paying me, for example, for this class, then I don't have any other expectations of you. Like I mean, you're giving me money, hopefully, or something. You're like, there's some energy exchange happening so that I can just be here and serve you and share the teachings that I know with you in this moment. But then there's also the responsibility of the student. The responsibility of the student is to be thoughtful and approach the relationship consciously, to not take in everything that the teacher says, to recognize their own inherent value and to not belittle themselves and put themselves down, and to not let themselves be abused as much as possible by a teacher. To be discerning about who you choose as your teacher and what you take in or not. So I guess what I'm saying is we have responsibilities according to our role, but it doesn't mean that we're less valuable than each other. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I think we need to elevate students. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
But you still need to educate through the words that you use in your classes, reminding students of that power. Because I think naturally students come to the experience thinking that the teacher can solve something for them or is there to fix them, or that they are a half looking for somebody else giving them the other half. So that's why this book is so important, because you offer so many tangible things to do in classes to remind them that that's not the case and that's not true.
I'm wondering if you've had this experience where you've had a student who has a transformational experience, maybe in a class, or they've come to you for a while and their life is changing and maybe they're really like finding more peace and joy, and they look at you in a way that's almost like with such admiration, and almost like love, and think, and they might even say to you like, you've saved me, or you've helped me, or you've done. And it's like, as a person, as a human, like, how do you take that on? Like, how do you respond to that? Like, I'm wondering how you respond, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things that one side of you is so grateful to hear that you've been a part of somebody's true transformation. And
Yeah.
there's not there's this side of happiness just for what they're saying. And then maybe there's this like split moment of also being like an egotistical side of like, yay, I did something right. Your human side, like patting yourself on the back.
Yeah.
But then hopefully, and this is what happens for me, and I hope for other teachers too, you can help the student come to realize that you're just the finger pointing to the moon.
Mm.
You're
I love
not the moon itself. And this is the thing that humans do. We misidentify with the vehicle that brings us to the thing. We think that the thing that's taking us there is it, not the pathway to it. So it's in a way you're trying to tell them like, I'm just the tour guide.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love that finger pointing at the moon. That's awesome.
Thank you. My teacher told me that one.
I mean, I've heard it, but I haven't heard of it recently, and it's such a beautiful image. It's so interesting because I think when we start teaching and we're insecure, we need that positive, kind of affirmation, and it helps us to keep going. But then I think after a while, it changes, and it's almost like we get more confident, and then maybe it's because we start to believe that, and I feel like that's where there's a danger too. So I feel like part of the response that I think we need to have as a teacher to a student's praise depends on where we are in our journey. And I think that's why I bring up imposter syndrome. I think it's important to recognize, like, if you're new and insecure, it's okay to let yourself be built up. If you, especially for teachers who feel like they're not enough. Like, I feel like we need more yoga teachers who see themselves as imperfect and maybe have a marginalized background. Like, we need more disabled yoga teachers and yoga teachers with larger bodies and older yoga teachers. And I think that would help diversify the fields for sure. But then at some point along the journey, do we start to get full of ourselves? And I think that might be where some of the abuse comes in. Because if, like I said earlier, like, we need to be careful because there has been abuse in every major lineage of yoga. And I think it's not just by chance. Like, there's like a theme here. You know what I mean? There's like there's something going on. So I just think it's important for yoga teachers to really be conscious of that.
100%. I mean, it comes back to humility again and again. And when you keep returning to the service aspect, I think it can help not fall into that pitfall.
Do you spend hours agonizing over yoga sequences, desperately seeking inspiration to keep your classes fresh and engaging? You're not alone. Designing dynamic flows to cater to different abilities and goals can be a time consuming challenge for even the most seasoned yoga teachers. The Pose Bible is here to save the day. It's your roadmap to effortless sequence creation. This comprehensive resource is a goldmine of yoga poses, categorized by breadth, family, difficulty, benefits, and so much more. This will help you spend less time planning and more time teaching. Impress your students with diverse and creative sequences. Feel confident knowing you're offering a well-rounded yoga experience for all. Always feel prepared with 10 done for you sequences. Get your copy today for only $13 and transform your yoga teaching. This includes downloadable 85-page PDF valued at $97, 10 done-for-you flows valued at $27, everything you need to stop stressing and start sequencing. Value priceless. Stop wasting precious time on sequence creation. Get the Pose Bible today for only $13 and reclaim your energy for what matters most, inspiring your students. The link is in the show notes.
In the book, and I loved this, you talk about the hope to teach in a way that gives everybody a way in or an access point, and that access point is going to be different depending on people. The hope is that you cannot have somebody like sit one out, and that there's a variation for everybody if they choose. However, a choice is also to sit and rest, or to sit and lay down, or do whatever feels at the highest service for them. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how to give students that permission?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's great. I love what we've been talking about, but it's true that most of the book is really about, I think, these more practical things around like how to make an asana accessible, or how to make it work for multiple people at the same time. I think one of the biggest challenges teachers face is that, teaching a group class where you automatically have diversity in the group. Like, you're going to have disabled people in the group. I mean, I think something like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 Americans identifies as disabled. So if you have a group class of 20 people, like, there's disabled people there. And you may not see it, you may not know it, but they're there. And so I think it's important to be honest with that and with yourself, and also just like take the time to really reflect on how to teach in a way that is accessible, and also that could potentially bring different people to you. Like, you don't have to just teach one, like, quote, level. Like, you could teach multiple forms of a practice at the same time. I love to do that. I love to have classes where people are practicing in a chair and on the mat at the same time. It's one of my favorite things, and because I feel like that is really an integrated experience. So I think there's lots of tools. I mean, I could talk about, but I would say when it comes to asana, I think the most important thing is to really like change the way we think of asana and think of each practice as a spectrum. I call them a spectrum of possibility, like a rainbow. Like, each practice is like a little rainbow. I know it sounds corny, but I'm a little corny, but like, each practice is a rainbow. And but I'm serious, like, okay, so like in a rainbow, it's like, it's all nice, it's all beautiful. The red isn't really nicer than the green, like, it's different. And I think to really stop with our kind of, I'm going to say, ableist approach to physical practice that assumes that more is better, and that like physically advanced form is better or more advanced than another form. And it's just not true. I mean, yoga is an internal spiritual practice. So in a sense, the physical expression is just that. It's just an expression of an internal experience. And I think we get so distracted by it. And part of that is because of yeah. And it's beautiful too. Like, I admire it personally, but I think it's a distraction from, I think, the internal experience. And so to if we can change as teachers, if we can change our mindset to start to like seeing it all as kind of equal, I think it supports our students. Even if they want to push themselves physically, it still supports them to do it in a way that's safe, to be practicing yoga all the time, whether it's in this quote adapted form or like in a full expression of a pose. The yoga can happen anywhere. Uh, and yeah, leaving people out, to me, that was the original thing you asked. I would just say, to me, like anytime we teach and someone feels excluded or harmed, I think we're not teaching yoga, because the first teaching of yoga, at least according to the Yoga Sutras, is ahimsa, or non-harm or non-violence. And I think to be excluding someone is harming them. Um, to push someone beyond their capacity is also harming them. Um, so I think we need to step back and look at maybe the ethical teachings of yoga, and kind of, that's what I do in the book too, is talk about how ethics automatically creates accessibility. So like if we practice ahimsa, then it all flows from there.
I think that's another genius thing of really, I guess, the language of Sanskrit and how it says like the first thing. If you get the first thing, kind of everything else falls into place.
Um,
So we're kind of automatically set up for success if you just start at the very beginning. But you offer this really tangible way of putting this into practice of prepare separately and then practice together. And you kind of walk through what that would look like. And I was hoping you would share it here because I am wondering how you maintain a sense of momentum in the classes, or does it have a feel of stop start so that you can cater to a variation of it for one body? And what does that look like in a little more detail?
Prepare separately, practice together is something I teach for creating those integrated classes where people are practicing at very different levels, like in a chair and on the mat at the same time. I mean, I come from a hatha yoga lineage, so for me, we teach in a way, and I've been trained to teach in a way that's probably slower and less flowy than a lot of yoga teachers today. And so I recognize that this may not work for everyone, and I have some other ideas for flowing. But I would just say, if you teach in a slower style, where you just like do one practice and then you do the next one, this skill works excellent, which is you prepare the foundation of the pose separately, because in the chair, a seated form of a pose, the foundation is different than the mat version, meaning that maybe the legs are doing a different thing, or the lower body. And so we kind of just do the preparatory part of the pose separate. Like, so if you're going to do like cobra pose, for example, in the chair, you could lean forward, have the hands on the knees, and kind of lower the head down. On the mat, you could come into the preparatory position, like hands under the shoulders, forehead down. And then together, everyone can connect with their breath, exhale, inhale, slowly come up into the pose. So you've created a foundation for the practice in the chair and on the mat that is different, but the experience of doing the pose is shared. And I think that creates more of an integrated experience, rather than, because the other thing I see happening sometimes is like, if there's someone practicing in a chair or like an adapted practice, or needs some quote modification, which I don't really like that word, but sometimes the teachers you'll like teach one version, like here's the pose. If you can't do that, then do this. And I think that doesn't work for me as well. I think that's a slightly, I don't know what the word is. It's like almost, what's the word? Harmful? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's just making it seem like it's a secondary choice, or it's like the not as good. Yeah. And so I think to avoid that, I offer skills like this, like I'm talking about, prepare separately, practice together. Another skill in a flowing class is to actually just to demonstrate the chair form and verbally teach the mat practice. So I do that with sun salutation a lot. I know, I know. It's not that hard. If you get used to it, or you can do it with any flow. Actually, if you practice it enough ahead of time, you can practice doing it in the chair, and then ask the chair students to watch you, and then verbally give instruction. You could give instruction verbally for both, but you could focus the verbal instruction on the mat form. That's another way to kind of integrate a flow. And then one other idea is to slow down a flow, just generally speaking. A lot of flow classes are one breath per movement. And I think sometimes it's just too fast to teach multiple variations. So it could be 2 breaths per movement or something. And then my last thought about it is in flowing classes, sometimes using a wall, like a person's practicing sitting in a chair, could use a wall in a similar way that the mat students might be using the floor. In terms of hand placement, even your feet placement on the wall. So the wall can become like a floor. That's something worth experimenting with.
One thing, I mean, you're talking about it now, but I think you do this so brilliantly, is to challenge yoga teachers to look at the essence of the shape and then play with the orientation of whether they're on the floor, in a chair, against a wall, or in a bed, and say, okay, now that you're in this different starting point, how can you still capture the essence and the experience, the feeling of the posture now that you're starting from a new beginning? And I think you had a couple of sections where you like list out 20 ways to do Bhujapirasana or something like that. And I just was like, this is so creative. And I think that especially maybe teachers who are dealing with feeling either burnt out or bored or very stale in their teaching, that turning to accessible yoga, and like I'm going to do someday, go take a training with you, that there's so much more variation in the way that we can invite students in, that maybe we're just not seeing because we haven't learned to look at it from a different starting point.
Yeah, actually, I think I'm inspired by my students, and all of accessible yoga comes from them. Like, I really feel like, in fact, this book is dedicated to my students because they showed me what they need and what they want. And the creativity that I have comes from just trying to serve them. So like I would have a student who couldn't do something or other, and like through collaboration, we find something new. And I think I often go back to, like you said, to this idea of the why, looking at every practice. It could be asana, pranayama, meditation, but to explore a practice and think about why are we doing it? Like, what is the purpose? What's the benefit and the goal? And like, how can I cultivate that experience in other ways? Like, it's a backward bend. It's meant to, strengthen the back or expand the front of the body, create extension in the spine. It's like, well, okay, so if I have a student in the chair or practicing in bed, how can they get that experience too? Like, is there a way that I can use my creativity to create that kind of internal experience, like you said, in a different way, which could be an orientation, like changing the direction of the body in space so that gravity affects us differently. That's a huge part of asanas, looking at how gravity is working on the body. But it also could be using props. Props are really useful that way. Being creative, breaking things down, like just doing a part of a pose. I talk about that sometimes. Like sometimes a pose is complex and it can be easier to do just one piece. Like, what are the arms doing? And let's just focus on that first. So, yeah. And I'd say for any teacher that's bored, like find a yoga student who isn't comfortable in doing your classes, and then you won't be bored anymore. You know what I mean? Like, go teach your parent or your kid, or, you know what I mean? Like, find someone who doesn't fit the mold of your regular students, and your mind will be expanded.
Yeah, I really appreciated the story that you told in the book about showing up to teach for a hospital, and basically all of your students was it quadriplegic,
Yeah.
where there was barely any, obviously, availability of movement, and that you show up and you feel kind of panicked, like, how can I serve? How am I meant to teach yoga? And that you like recruited some of your friends and came back and felt like a little more prepared, but that then you focused on the other kind of layers of it. And then you speak later in the book about like the koshas and the bodies, that it doesn't always have to be physical, which I thought was so just genius too. But then on the flip side, you made it to where it's like, okay, well, if you're being a trauma sensitive teacher too, sometimes those subtler aspects are a little more agitating to a nervous system that cannot rest
Yeah.
and settle. So I just found your book so thorough and so thoughtful. And I mean, you even made it apparent in how you're like, I don't like this word modify because it has this connotation of less than. And I feel like you've done that in all areas of your work, which is a testament to your continued effort towards mastery.
Mastery. There you go.
I had to bring it back in.
That's awesome. Thank you. No, I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. And that is my goal. I mean, I'm trying to share what's actually very complex. I mean, most people think teaching yoga is like so simple, and it is so complex. And I don't even, I feel like this book, I could have written, it was like so much longer than I expected. I don't know how many pages, but it was like a lot longer than I expected. And I could have gone on and on.
291.
I could have written another 200 pages about it, easy. Honestly, I had to stop myself because it's just, well, like you see here in these conversations, I'm sure you could just go so far into every piece, the language choices we make, the poses and practices we do, why we do them and how they work and how to communicate well, how to hold space, how to take care of ourselves. It's really incredible. There's it's such an art, actually. I'd say teaching is really an art, and that's the other thing I'll just add is that I think for many teachers, that we aren't trained in the teaching tools piece. Like we're trained often in the kind of the basic elements of how you do the practice, kind of the technology of it, without really being trained in teaching methodology, pedagogy, like how to teach. And I think that's something that I've had to really work on over the years. It's like, how can I best share this with people? And I just think that's something that's really worth exploring for teachers.
Yeah. Well, I think it takes a life to explore those answers. And I'm so glad that you've written what you've learned. You're just sharing what's kind of worked for you in your experience. And I found a lot of support in your book on that topic because you're right. There really isn't, number one, it's time. There's not that much time to learn everything there is needed to learn in our version of yoga teacher training now. I mean, it's an impossible feat. But I would love to close with, if you were to kind of tell or talk to yourself when you were a very beginning student or just on the precipice of deciding that you wanted to do this, would you have any words of wisdom for that version of yourself? Or what would you say to the Jivana teacher that was just starting?
Wow. I think I would just say, I mean, it's funny because I am such a shy person. And so for me, I would have to just really give myself a pep talk and encouragement to keep doing it and that it's worth it. And like, um, I think teaching will offer me personally tremendous benefit and potentially also my students. And so I think it's kind of a win-win. And so to like really face all the challenges head on because it's worth it. And I would just say that to all yoga teachers out there. And I will also, one last thing I just want to share, which is like my appreciation for yoga teachers is that honestly, this book to me is like, I wouldn't say a love letter, but kind of like, I don't think yoga teachers get appreciated enough. And I think that especially the people that are out there quietly teaching, and they don't get like a lot of attention. I mean, I get lucky because I get to be on a podcast like this and talk about myself and, whatever I do. But it's like, I think a lot of people just serve, like they're just out there teaching. And I just really grateful for them. Like, I just feel like they're doing amazing work in touching so many lives and potentially transforming our world. So I want to say thank you to all yoga teachers that are out there teaching and serving and doing the best they can. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so inspired by you, and I am honored to be in your energy and in your presence. And thank you for all that you gave to our listeners today. Can you tell them a little bit how they can connect with you and your world and all of the amazing offers that you have?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me. I would say, yeah, I mean, my book's available pretty much wherever you get books, and I do have trainings. You can go to accessibleyogaschool.com. Or follow me on social media. I give away a lot of stuff free. I teach a lot on Instagram and I love it. I love doing it there at Jivana Hayman. And the trainings are fun because I do now in person again, which I'm so excited about to be back in person with some people, but I do online and in person. I just love it. I love to be with yoga teachers. It's like my favorite thing. I just got back from teaching in Europe and oh my God, it was just amazing to be with people and to be sharing space.
Oh, I can't wait to be in that space. I'm serious. One of these days I'm going to get there. It's a little challenging right now being in the
Oh
thick
yeah.
of early motherhood, but
Yeah.
we'll
Yeah, I know. No, you need to take care of yourself and your family, but someday I hope to have you in a training.
Very soon. Well, until then, Jivana and everybody listening, stay blessed out there and see you back for another episode next Wednesday.
Thanks for listening. If this is your first time, peruse our feed to see if there's something else that will serve you. We're so grateful that you're here and invite you to join our inner circle by subscribing to our newsletter. If this episode resonated with you, help us spread the word by sending it to a friend who needs to hear this message. Likes, follows, sends, shares, and reviews help us to continue delivering high-quality content to you for free each and every week. Don't forget to tag @MasterYourYogaTeaching so we can reshare. I am a certified yogi. However, this podcast is intended for information and entertainment only. If you are interested in mentorship or coaching with me, check out the website linked in the show notes to get more information. This content and other content produced by CLW Studios and affiliated partners is not therapy, and nothing in this content indicates a therapeutic relationship. Any opinions of guests on the podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of Mackenzie or CLW Studios. Learn more about Mackenzie, her guests, and CLW Studios by following the links in the show notes. Keep shining, and we will see you next Wednesday for another dose of Master Your Yoga Teaching. Namaste blessed. Are you feeling stuck? If so, this is your exclusive invite to Vortex Yoga Retreat in Sedona, Arizona, this October 11th through 14th, 2024. Sedona's breathtaking red rocks transform into a fiery masterpiece in the autumn. Imagine practicing yoga amidst this stunning backdrop, feeling the ancient vortexes amplify your intentions and awaken your spirit. This retreat is for you if you crave a deeper connection with your energetic body, the chakras, you're ready to align your life with purpose and passion, or you seek a transformational experience to unleash your inner power. Here's what awaits you. 4 days and 3 nights nestled in Sedona's beauty, daily yoga and meditation, delicious local dinners, sound healing, hiking to infamous Sedona vortexes, connection with like-minded souls on this empowering journey, learn chakra balancing principles and practices, and a special gift from your hosts. Don't wait. Space is extremely limited and spots are going fast. Visit rachakaretreats.com/Sedona to book your spot and choose your accommodations, or click the link in the show notes. Use code MYYT for 10% off. Are you ready to balance your energy and align your life?